The revelation principle. At first sight, it seems that the more general definition of mechanisms will allow us to do more than is possible using incentive-compatible direct revelation mechanisms introduced in Section 9.3. This turns out to be false. Any general mechanism that implements a function in dominant strategies can be converted into an incentive-compatible one. Proposition 9.25. Revelation principle. If there exists an arbitrary mechanism that implements F in dominant strategies, then there exists an incentive-compatible mechanism that implements F. The payments of the players in the incentive-compatible mechanism are identical to those obtained at equilibrium of the original mechanism. Proof. The proof is very simple. The new mechanism will simply simulate the equilibrium strategies of the players. That is, let S1, S2, S3, and Sn be a dominant strategy equilibrium of the original mechanism. We define a new direct revelation mechanism. F of T1, T2, T3 until Tn equals to A of S1 of T1, S2 of T2, and so on to Sn of Tn, and Pi prime of T1, T2, T3 until Tn equals to Pi of S1 of T1, S2 of T2, and so on to Sn of Tn. Now, since each Si is a dominant strategy for player I, then for every Ti x minus I, xi prime, we have that Vi of Ti A of Si of Ti x minus I minus Pi of Si of Ti x minus I, which is greater than or equals to Vi of Ti A of xi prime x minus I minus Pi of xi prime x minus I. Thus, in particular, this is true for all x minus I equals to S minus I of T minus I, and any xi prime equals to Si of Ti prime, which gives the definition of incentive compatibility of the mechanism F, P1 prime, P2 prime, and so on to Pn prime. Corollary 9.26. If there exists an arbitrary mechanism that ex post Nash implements F, then there exists an incentive-compatible mechanism that implements F. Moreover, the payments of the players in the incentive-compatible mechanism are identical to those obtained in equilibrium of the original mechanism. Proof. We take the ex post implementation and restrict the action space of each player, as in Proposition 9.23, to those that are taken for some input type in the ex post equilibrium S1, S2, S3, and Sn. Proposition 9.23 states that now S1, S2, S3, and Sn is a dominant strategy equilibrium of the game with the restricted spaces, and thus the mechanism with the restricted action spaces is an implementation in dominant strategies. We can now invoke the revelation principle to get an incentive-compatible mechanism. The revelation principle does not mean that indirect mechanisms are useless. In particular, general mechanisms may be adaptive. Multi-round significantly reduced the communication or computation burden of the players or of the auctioneer relative to an adaptive direct mechanism. An example is that the case of combinatorial auctions studied in Chapter 11.